Folks, I just read Trump's executive order. It's actually a memorandum technically, but I'm going to call it an executive order. I just read Trump's executive order on unemployment, and it is a watered down version of what could have been. Don't get me wrong. I am happy for those on unemployment to be getting some extra assistance right now if the administration can pull this off. But by the end of this video, I think you will understand what I mean when I say that what Trump signed today is a watered down version of what could have been if stimulus talks had been successful, especially in terms of how long this weekly $400 will last, because it ain't until the end of the year, folks. I will do the math later in this video, later on, to show you just how short term this is. But let's back up. So earlier today, I released a video letting you know that Trump did in fact sign the executive orders today for a payroll tax deferral, eviction moratorium, unemployment, and student loans. In that video, I told you what the president said about each of these executive orders. The actual text of these executive orders is now online. I printed them out. I'm going through them. And as I read through them, I do note that there are some differences between the actual text and what the president said. For example, about the payroll tax deferral, the president said it would kick in September, but then he seemed to correct himself and claimed that they would actually shoot for August. Trump's words were super confusing there in the press conference, but the text of the executive order itself actually says September. So I'm not sure why Trump brought up August in the press conference. And in this video, I will be going over the executive order that I know many of you are interested in, namely the one on unemployment. It's technically not an executive order, it's a memorandum, like I said. More of a technical thing though, it still has the force of law. So this memorandum that Trump signed today says that the federal government will pay those eligible for it, and based on what I'm reading, not everybody eligible for the $600 would be eligible for the $400, which is an extra $300 per week federal kick-in, with a call on states to kick in an additional $100 per week on top of normal benefits. So in this video, I'm going to cover who would be eligible for the extra $400 weekly, whether or not the $400 payments under the executive order or the memorandum would be retroactive, when the program ends, all this stuff, okay? But first, let me just say that I believe that Trump will be challenged on this memorandum for the extra $400 weekly. I foresee legal challenges from states who will say, you can't do this. Maybe political challenges from Democrats, even though that would probably look bad. But who knows? Anyway, I can really see this happening, because although this presidential memorandum has the force of law, it is not federal law. Some states' unemployment systems, they may come back, some states' unemployment offices may come back and say, no, this isn't the law, we're not going to do this. But I'm going to walk through the memorandum for what it says, but please keep in mind that what Trump did today is fraught with difficulties, to say the least. This isn't how things should be. A deal should have been cut with this. The unemployment, the stimulus checks, all the rest, right? Not these piecemeal presidential actions that are watered down versions of a true legislatively inactive stimulus. For example, who's eligible for this extra $400 per week? It's not simply everybody on unemployment. It's not. The FPUC, the extra $600 weekly, you could be collecting $1 of unemployment from your state and you would be eligible for the $600 a week. Section 4 of this memorandum says that to be eligible in a given week for the $400 for that week, you must receive at least $100 per week of unemployment compensation, which includes the PUA for freelancers, the extension of the PEUC and all that, right? But still, $100 minimum for that week. Here in California, the minimum weekly UI benefit is only $40. So a person receiving less than $100 in unemployment wouldn't be eligible per this text. In my opinion, this is leaving out potentially some people who need it the most, and that's quite unfortunate. Now let's talk about whether this would be retroactive or not. The answer to this question is yes. The executive order says that the $400 payment per week, which as I mentioned in my last video would be $300 for the feds, on the feds to kick in and states kicking in $100, would be to eligible claimants from the week of unemployment ending August 1st, 2020. So this would be retroactive to pick up where the CARES Act left off. Bigger question is, are states going to be on board with this? And if they are on board with this, when are they going to be able to pull this off? I imagine that just like last time, some states will be able to pull this off rather quickly, and other states will really struggle here. Some states may not even agree with this approach at all. We'll have to see. Now let's talk about the funding for this, which informs how long these payments would last. Well, for one thing, these payments would terminate if there is actual federal legislation enacted for enhanced unemployment benefits. But what about apart from that? What about if another bill isn't passed anytime soon? Now, if I were a novice at this, I would look on the last page here in Section 6, where it says termination, Section 6 termination. I would see a lot of mumbo jumbo, but I would see a date that says December 6th, 2020, and I would tell you that these payments will be made through December 6th, 2020. But I am not a novice. I read the rest of the mumbo jumbo, the rest of the paragraph, which says, and I quote, The Lost Wages Assistance Program, that's this extra $400 weekly program, described in Section 4B of this memorandum, shall be available for eligible claimants until the balance of the DRF reaches $25 billion or for weeks of unemployment ending not later than December 6, 2020, whichever occurs first, at which time the Lost Wages Assistance Program shall terminate. Okay? I imagine you didn't really get what that was. You're like, what the heck is this DRF? I'm going to explain it, all right? What is the DRF? Let me cover it real quick, and then I'll tell you my estimate of how long the money under this memorandum will last, and it's nowhere near December 6, folks. I think the December 6 number is just there for optics. So what this memorandum says is that to pay for the unemployment boost, states would tap into the Coronavirus Relief Fund, CRF, different from the DRF. CRF, states would tap into this Coronavirus Relief Fund for their $100 per week. Coronavirus Relief Fund was $150 billion originally allocated in the CARES Act for the states, and more than $80 billion of that is still available. Okay, so out of this fund, the executive order is calling on states to use their allocation from the fund to pay $100 per week unemployment. All right, that doesn't have anything to do with the termination. Now, for the federal piece, the $300 per week, right, which when combined with the state $100 per week gets you to $400 per week. The executive order directs up to $44 billion from another fund, the Department of Homeland Security's Disaster Relief Fund. That's the DRF that's mentioned in this termination paragraph. So it's saying that the federal government would tap into this fund to cover the $300 per week. Big question is, how long is this money going to last under this executive order? So the DRF, according to the executive order, has $70 billion in it. $70 billion less the $44 billion allocated under this executive order is $26 billion. I imagine they rounded down to $25 billion on this last page. Now, let's do some math here, back to the napkin. According to the weekly unemployment data, how many people are collecting unemployment benefits? 30 million roughly in a given week, including both the regular unemployment, that's a 16.3 million number in the July jobs report, plus the millions on PUA, the pandemic unemployment assistance. All right, so track with me here. We got 30 million people receiving benefits, and so they would therefore be entitled to the $400 weekly, of which $300 weekly is from the federal DRF. Now, some will not be eligible if they make less than $100 on unemployment, right? But we're ignoring that for these purposes, okay? Because that's a relatively small proportion of the population receiving unemployment benefits, all right? So 30 million eligible for $300 per week, times $300 per week, right? That's the federal kick in out of the DRF, the $300 per week. So what is 30 million people receiving the $300 per week times $300 per week? That is $9 billion weekly out of the DRF. The executive order, or the memorandum rather, says that payments will stop once the DRF only has $25 billion in it, meaning that it only allocates $44 billion from the DRF to these payments. So what's $44 billion divided by the $9 billion per week? That's less than 5 weeks, folks. That's the weeks ending August 1st, August 8th, August 15th, August 22nd, August 29th. This only gets us through August by my math. By my math. Haven't seen this worked out anywhere by anybody else, but that's my math based on my reading of the executive order memorandum. So no, folks, this is not a $1,600 a month deal. Don't be fooled. Caveat here. Included in that $30 million sum that I mentioned previously in my calculation are those receiving less than $100 in normal unemployment benefits on a weekly basis. So they would be excluded from the $400 and therefore the $300. So it actually might be a bit more than 5 weeks. But my point is, apart from further action, this ain't lasting long. And then what? What happens when the DRF hits $25 billion and then this terminates? What happens then? Another executive order for Trump to come in on a stallion and save the day again? Where's that money going to come from? Is Congress finally going to get in gear by that point? Oh, I forgot, they'll still be on recess. This is the situation our politicians have left us in. As I've been saying all week, these Trumpian measures enacted by an executive order would be merely watered-down versions of a true stimulus, and that is exactly what I see in this memorandum on unemployment signed today by the president. I'm glad it's something, don't get me wrong, but it's not ideal in any respect and is not what it should be. Thank you so much for letting me keep you informed, folks. If you like what you see, I would really appreciate it if you press the like button below. It really helps the YouTube algorithm. I don't think anybody else is pointing this out right now, and I would love to get this information out to as many people as possible. All right, that is it for me for today. I will see you tomorrow in another video. Bye-bye.